All right, so welcome everyone. Um, Thank you for coming and making the time when we could have been doing so many other things. And also let's reflect on this wonderful opportunity of inhabiting and making this space possible. It would not have been possible but for each one of you and us. So to begin, I think let's establish a good motivation for our session today. Think about how all sentient beings have been kind to us in the past, are kind to us in the present, and will be kind to us in the future. Let us think that we must attain enlightenment, that particular field of everlasting happiness, in order to release all these beneficial beings from suffering and leading them to enlightenment. Let us get our postures in order, upright, cross-legged if possible. Otherwise, try having at least the feet planted firmly to the ground. Keep your spine straight in a comfortable and relaxed manner, neither too tight nor too loose. The hands either on your knees if you're more comfortable doing that, or one palm on top of the other. The eyes can be slightly open. They say that it helps in the senses, excuse me, the senses not falling into slumber. But if you aren't comfortable with that, you can also keep them entirely closed. Just be mindful and vigilant. Head slightly tilted forward so that the nape of the neck is elongated. Now gently dwell in this particular posture, in this present moment. Lama Tsongkhapa, in his book, The Foundation of All Good Qualities, he talks about the perfect human birth and how wonderful it is to have this precious human body. And the even more precious meeting with the Buddha Dharma. So to be here at this time where one can practice one's path to enlightenment is so precious and wonderful. Focus on your regular breath. How wonderful and precious it is. Let's stay within this for a few minutes. It is fine if thoughts arise. Just hold them gently. And then let them go. Look at the thoughts metaphorically. Whenever they arise, just think of them as something which is passing by, either clouds in an unimpeded sky or a reel in a film, and let them go. Stay with the breath. So slowly return. If you want to, um, just take a couple of minutes to stretch if you have to. Um, get coffee or tea or water, whatever. I'm ready with my coffee. Yeah. So the topic today, returning to the noble truths. It's written that the foundational precepts of the Four Noble Truths are the doors to enter into an understanding of the Buddhist world. These were the Shakyamuni Buddha's first teachings and bear constant affirmation for the spiritual seeker. So this is at best a primer, as I am not qualified for deeper levels of teaching yet. So we'll begin with the story that leads to the Four Noble Truths, a story that most are familiar with. So in the Nalanda tradition, as nurtured by the Tibetan Buddhists, they believe in a plurality of Buddhas. And this story is about the Shakyamuni, the Buddha of our age, roughly 2,500 years ago, born in Lumbini, Siddharth Gautam, in the foothills of the Himalayas, border of Nepal, of today's Nepal and Bihar and UP. So he was born in a privileged family, born a prince, Siddharth Gautam, and there was a prophecy at the time of his birth that either he would be a great king or a great yogi. And of course, like all good fathers, his father wanted him to be a great king. So kept him very protected. Apparently never let him out of the palace grounds. Created a kind of utopia within that. And Siddharth Gautam was married and later had a son, Rahul. And one day he went outside the environs of his palace and came across everyday things. Saw old age person, quote unquote, suffering from old age. Saw disease and sickness for the first time. And he saw death. And he wasn't able to leave those imprints when he returned. And later he also saw an ascetic. And he wondered at why the ascetic didn't seem to be that perturbed by what was around him. So he thought that maybe being an ascetic might be of help. And he asked for permission, but like most parents do, they denied him permission to leave the grand life that they thought that they were providing to their child, who was now in his late 20s, apparently. And well, he wasn't convinced that this was the life for him. So he escaped. He left the palace and his family, his child, his wife, and became a wandering ascetic. He practiced different kinds and practiced in different schools of asceticism for around a period of 6 years. Spent most of them in the kingdom of Magad, with its, at that time, I think the capital was at Patliputra. So this is 4th century BC, more or less. And there were many schools of spiritual rigor at the time. And he was practicing outside these in the suburbs of this place called Gaya. And finally, after much penance and meditation, he attained enlightenment under a peepal tree, what is now known as the Bodhi tree as well, the Ficus religiosa. It's related to the banyan as well, I think. So now I think comes the pivotal moment for all of us, where he has achieved enlightenment and doesn't know as to whether he should keep it to himself because of its profundity, or whether he is supposed to share it. Finally, so there are a lot of stories around it, a lot of interpretations around it. And after wrestling with this idea for a long time as to what to do with his awakening, he finally decides to teach and goes searching for 5 of his ascetic peers with whom he had practiced, and finds them in present-day Sarnath, and begins his teaching. So the first teaching, the turning of the wheel of Dharma, begins. And in the first teaching, he lays down what is known as the 4 Noble Truths. It is also interpreted as the 4 Nobles truth, the truth of the Aryas, the nobles, and which describe the truth of the universe and nature of its reality. They are Dukh, the first noble truth, that life is unsatisfactory, is sorrowful, is painful, is suffering. The common word with which Dukh is denoted these days. But Dukh doesn't have a direct English translation. So we'll look at its etymology for a few minutes. I'll just lay down the 4 Noble Truths. The second is Samadhi, or Samadhi as well. A lot of people call it Samadhi. That suffering is caused by craving. That the uday of suffering is because of factors where we cling to things. The third is called Nirodh, or the cessation of craving, that an end of craving is possible, and that is an end to suffering. And the 4th Noble Truth is the truth of the Marg. In Sanskrit, it's called the Marg. In Pali, it's called the Magga. That to end craving, there is a path. So I would be quoting for the first Noble Truth. I'll be quoting from a couple of places. The first is in the Mahasacaka Sutra, or Sut, which is in the Majjhimika Nikaya. And this is where the Buddha is giving his first teachings, and he says, When my mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of imperfection, malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to knowledge of the destruction of the taints. I directly knew as it actually is. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. I directly knew as it actually is. These are the taints. This is the origin of the taints, is the cessation of the taints. This is the way leading to the cessation of the taints. To put this in a simplified language, I'll quote from the Vietnamese monk. So this was from Bhikkhu Bodhi, the erstwhile American professor of philosophy, now an ordained Theravadin monk. His translation, in the Buddha's words, an anthology of discourses from the Pali canon. These are very, very, I don't know whether you can see these or not, but these are very good translations, very approachable. Now, to quote it in a very simplified manner, I'll actually use the Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh's book, Old Path, White Clouds, where in the chapter Turning the Wheel of Dharma, he says, brothers, and of course, this is the Buddha saying this, brothers, there are four truths: the existence of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. I call these the four noble truths. The first is the existence of suffering. Birth, old age, sickness, and death are suffering. Sadness, anger, jealousy, worry, anxiety, fear, and despair are suffering. Separation from loved ones is suffering. Association with those you hate is suffering. Desire, attachment, and clinging to the five aggregates are suffering. Brothers, the second truth is the cause of suffering. Because of ignorance, people cannot see the truth about life, and they become caught in the flames of desire, anger, jealousy, grief, worry, fear, and despair. Brothers, the third truth is the cessation of suffering. Understanding the truth of life brings about the cessation of every grief and sorrow and gives rise to peace and joy. Brothers, the fourth truth is the path which leads to the cessation of suffering. It is the Noble Eightfold Path, which I have just explained. The Noble Eightfold Path is nourished by living mindfully. Mindfulness leads to concentration and understanding, which liberates you from every pain and sorrow. and leads to peace and joy. I will guide you along this path of realization. So today we'll talk a little about the first noble truth, dukkha. So it refers to suffering, unsatisfactoriness might be a better translation. Dukkha can be further divided into three parts, three kinds of dukkha. So the first is dukkha, the suffering of suffering. This refers to the emotional and physical discomfort and pain that all of us humans experience. The second is called viparinama dukkha. Viparinama is change, the suffering of change. So this refers to the unsatisfactoriness that we encounter because of our outright inability to accept change. We cling to our pleasurable experiences and we feel very sad when those pass. And we are just unable to accept the truth of impermanence. And the third kind of suffering after dukkha and viparinam dukkha is the sankhara dukkha, which is the suffering of existence, which is basically what the modern philosophers would call existential suffering, which is always there in the background. So it is a kind of a deeper unsatisfactoriness, more profound one, pertaining to existence and caused by the simple act of existing. So now, let me just check the etymology. It's very interesting. And there are 2-3 different etymologies which have been propounded. One of them is as said by Joseph Goldstein. He understands it. So Goldstein is a Vipassana practitioner, an American Vipassana teacher and writer. He says that it is made up of the prefix du and the root ka. Du and su is good in Sanskrit and du is bad, basically. So dukkha, in his estimation, is bad, and ka is empty. So it's basically an emptiness, a bad kind of emptiness. Also, because the people who first either brought Sanskrit or developed it in the subcontinent, they were mostly cattle herders. So, and horse as well, I think. So for them, the word kha originally meant an axle hole for their vehicles. So dukkha would mean having a bad axle hole, so leading to discomfort of that particular vehicle, which is again very interesting that we are talking about literally a vehicle here. Another etymology, which I think might be actually truer, is Monia Williams. So he says that dukkha, the Pali term, comes from the Sanskrit dus, which is bad, and stha, which is to stand. So basically, meaning to stand uncomfortably, to stand badly, in a way, an unease, which is quite interesting because that is how the Buddhist canon also sees dukkha, as an unease. So let us reflect a little on dukkha. Maybe I'll narrate a couple of anecdotes which I have lived through, and maybe then some of you can say something. And it is a reflection on our general unsatisfactoriness with the state of things. So there's this childhood, a school friend of mine whose entire aspirations in school was to become a big shot in the corporate world, be a CEO. And this was since school, since high school. And he became one of the youngest CEOs in India, is still a CEO, I think, of a very big company. And whenever I meet him, he is quite dissatisfied, which is quite usual. But the strange thing is that most of us, if we look at even our small aspirations when we were children, we found, as in we were able to get those aspirations, reach them. And we forgot that at one point in time, this was all we wanted. Because dissatisfaction, because suffering. We are always suffering because, as the Buddha says, we have a skewed and a very narrow, blinkered vision of happiness, of reality. And because of that, our aspirations are also very limited. And my partner's, again, childhood friend, and this is quite funny at times as well. But her aspiration, and she is a professional at the moment, and she is doing well in the conventional term of doing well. Her aspiration since she was very, very little was to get married and have children. And she was able to get married, and she has children. And the last time we met, she said that she has never been as unhappy as she has been, which doesn't have to do with the fact of being married or having children per se. But maybe what I am hinting at is the fact that we actually aspire to straws in the wind, to things which can't actually provide us with real happiness. And by real, I mean lasting happiness. it becomes essential for us to delve the path. The Buddha said not to believe him, but to check everything on the whetstone of our own experience. Which is the same thing to do. And he gives us the tools. I think he also asks of us to not reflect on dukkha with despair, but with compassion and with the requirement of helping others. Some might think that Buddha was being sadistic by pointing out and preaching the reality of suffering to people who are already miserable and in pain and dissatisfied in their own ways. But perhaps he was asking us to be more realistic while ascertaining samsara, and was also offering us the tools to navigate and understand dukkha. So maybe a compassionate understanding of dukkha is the first step towards alleviating it, both for ourselves and for others. So the pertaining to the Four Noble Truths, the Chogyam Trungpa says that if you understand the Four Noble Truths, there's nothing outside of that in all the Buddhist practices, and which is also, I think, reflected by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. It's echoed by him that once you understand these four principles, then all the rest of the teachings come from that. So, reflecting on the basic first noble truth of dissatisfaction, the Irish playwright Oscar Wilde said in an 1892 play, and we can actually look at it from the lens of the first noble truth. He writes, in this world, there are only two tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it. The last is much the worst. The last is a real tragedy. So, so I think you can unmute yourselves, and maybe we can have some discussion, some reflections, anything that you want to share. Of course, we'll end with a dedication later on, but maybe 10, 15 minutes to talk about what we have gone through. Are you able to unmute? Vivekji? Okay, let me just check. Yes, you can unmute now, I think.
Yes, now we can.
Yeah. I'm bad at Zoom, I suppose. Yeah, so anything to share about the first noble truth, Vivekji? Anyone?
दुख ही दुख है.
Dukh bhi dukh hai. Yes. Yeah, but it's interesting how we keep repeating the same patterns when we know that it doesn't actually bring us everlasting happiness. We are always trying to replicate the same happiness, and as happens with replication, there is a diminishing return theory always kicks in, I suppose.
And that will continue to happen if we do, if there, because there are a whole lot of other things that need to change. Our own habits, what we do, yeah.
Yes, I think basically how we look at suffering,
Yeah.
how we approach it. Anilji, you were saying something?
So I just wanted to ask you, you talked about Oscar Wilde. If you can just expand a little on those two aspects. I couldn't catch the second one actually, but if you can just expand a little with some example.
So he is basically saying in this particular play that when one gets what one wants, that is the real tragedy. And that is what I was alluding to when I shared with you my personal experiences of my two friends. That what they had been aspiring to for a number of years, they found it relatively early in life. And that was a tragedy, because at times when you get what you were aspiring for, you understand that it has not brought you the kind of everlasting happiness that you wanted out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think it has to do with the kind of aspirations we keep, because those aren't how we would find everlasting happiness, at least, because it is clinging to certain things. So if we are still clinging to things, I think inherently it is very, very difficult for us to find everlasting happiness in those things, because of impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
So I have forgotten the particular play, Lady Windermere's Fan, where Oscar Wilde states this. So I don't exactly remember the context in which one of the characters actually says this, but I am looking at it from a Buddhist prism, Buddhist philosophical prism.
But everyone is seeking happiness. That is something which is natural for us to seek happiness.
Of course.
And if you get happiness in something, but then after that you want something else, I think that is also fine. But the idea is that if you're not happy, you can't make others happy. So my philosophy is that you must be happy so that you can make others happy. Because if you're always sad and you are depressed and you are causing problems for yourself, then you are creating that environment around you as well. So seeking happiness and making others happy is a good thing. And one should always try and be happy, not through attachments, but basically, leading a good life and being there to help others. So seeking happiness through others is what I was thinking was, like a way to look at it. By making others happy. Seeking happiness by making others happy.
Well, of course, that is very important. But I would also like lay people, beginners like us, to look at our definitions of these words and to delve into it and um, further study and experience more of it. Because our definitions at times, they lack clarity.
Mhm.
And they are at times conditioned by our immediate ecosystems, maybe societal ecosystems, sociological ecosystems. And we need to actually delve into, that is the reason why we need to delve into the Dharma, so that we actually are able to understand as to how to travel the path, how to not cling to things, how to understand happiness through impermanence, and so on and so forth. That is, yeah, that is very, very important. And I'm just a beginner. So, yeah, personally, I think it is very important for us to keep uh, seeking happiness for ourselves and for others, but to also understand the nature of happiness.
Okay.
Nilashi ji,
Hi, Sujit.
anything to share? Except, I think you were laughing right now. So,
Yeah, because of Nilashi ji.
yeah.
No, I'm just thinking, so often in with a few friends, we, like, some of us share these modern psychology articles with each other, whether about childhood trauma or this or that sometimes. And I'm thinking, do any of the content from those articles or anything or the modern psychology has any relation with the first noble truth? And does it align with it? Or does modern psychology, like, do they marry the, can we marry these two? Or are they so divorced that there is no relation? Or there cannot be any relation? Because sometimes the moment I am reading an article and with my little minuscule knowledge of First Noble Truth and other teachings, I find a lot of difficulty in just seeing an article for what it is, because it seems like a very polarized perspective. Yeah. So what would you, how
Well,
would you
you'll have to use your intelligence and wisdom and be skillful about it, because what you are asking is quite an abstraction. Without actually reading something, I wouldn't be able to say um, anything for sure. And uh, and yeah, it is always possible to look at things from a particular perspective. So I do not see the reason why one cannot look at it in a manner where you would be able to incorporate what you know about the noble truths as well. Because if you think about it, um, actually there's nothing outside of it. The problem with maybe, so that is why I'm saying that unless and until I read a particular article, I would not be able to comment on that.
Sujit, I can give you an example from today, because a friend shared an article about trauma bonding in
Okay.
relationship. So I was wondering how does this carry on? I mean, how would I look at it from the, like you are using the term, Buddhist prism? And
Philosophical prism, yes.
yeah. How would you look at trauma bonding from that prism? Like, would there be such a place of trauma bonding here? Can we even relate to each other through trauma? Because how I would look at it is that where our very basic nature is
So what do
Buddhahood.
you mean by trauma bonding? Is it bonding with another human being through shared trauma?
Yes, one starts to relate to the
Yeah,
ups and
so
downs of
isn't
the
ups and downs
of the trauma. Like one would inflict trauma on the other. One would think of that infliction of violence as a rough patch or as something which is natural in a relationship, and then shower
okay,
them with love. And then,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking of it quite differently, because I was thinking that that the bond that one shares with people who have been through the same kinds of suffering. But trauma bonding, what I understand what you're saying, is basically when a person inflicts suffering and on another, and then tries to either rectify it or whatever through certain acts, and the bond that is created after that.
Yes. It's like the oppressor and oppressed relationship. Both get used to the other.
Yeah,
Like all of you
so I think there is a lot of ignorance. The Buddhist philosophical concept of ignorance is quite at play here. So what do you so what was the question again? Now
that
that I'm able to understand trauma bonding, what was the question again?
the question was that do you think that modern psychology is far removed from these ideas that we are presenting in Buddhism, or like
No,
Buddhism is presenting to us?
no, I don't think so. So there are schools of modern psychology, a number of schools, and there have been a lot of conversations around how Buddhist psychology can be of benefit to all these schools, and how one can actually look at things, including including, say, your trauma bonding, through that particular understanding of Buddhist psychology. But of course, you would actually have to ask an expert in Buddhist psychology about that. Maybe take it up with Kabirji or Priyadarshiji whenever he visits next. I think Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi is also visiting, was supposed to visit last
No,
week of
he's
April, I
coming.
think. Huh?
He's coming on 6th of May.
Oh yeah, he's coming on 6th of May. Maybe you can ask him this, because he has been a part of a number of conversations around Buddhist psychology in the modern psychological scenario.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sujit.
Anyone else? Anything? Yeah, Vivekji, it actually isn't a lot of coffee. It's maybe about 400 ml, but I've just been sipping it, so I haven't emptied more than 50 ml of it.
Seems to be a lot of it. तुम्हारी आवाज चली गई?
Isn't a lot, I'm saying. It's just the angle of the camera. See, it's actually smaller than a book.
Oh, larger than life.
Yeah, the camera does these things.
But the camera also never lies.
It does, it does. It does. I don't think camera displays reality, because after all, it's a projection, and then what we see is a projection of that projection.
Hmm.
But we'll talk about that some other day.
Yes, some other day.
Yeah. So it's 7:37, so kind of on time. I'm thinking if I can actually maybe deal with the other three noble truths one by one in other sessions. Let's see, whenever Kabirji isn't available or something. So let's do a dedication, and then we'll call it an evening. So I would partially, I'll read from a dedication which is in Lama Zopa's book, The Joy of Compassion. And partly I'll end with Shanti Deva's last verse. Due to all the past, present, and future merits collected by me, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and all other sentient beings, may Bodhicitta, the source of all the happiness and success of myself and all other sentient beings, be generated in my own mind and in the minds of all sentient beings, without even 1 second's delay, and may that which has been generated increase. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. So thank you, everyone. I think I should stop the recording now, and then maybe we can chat for a few more minutes if that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.